Was Joe Hamilton speaking to me earlier. Now, the Foreign Secretary says the UK and the US may have to rethink their approach to Gaza if Israel presses on with an invasion of Rafah. But speaking in a press conference alongside Anthony Blinken, Lord Cameron also said that the UK's position on export licences to Israel remained unchanged.
Thanks. On Israel and international humanitarian law, as required by the UK's robust arms export control regime, I have now reviewed the most recent advice about the situation in Gaza and Israel's conduct of their military campaign. The latest assessment leaves our position on export licences unchanged. This is consistent with the advice that I and other ministers have received, and as ever, we will keep the position under review. Let me be clear, though, we continue to have grave concerns around the humanitarian access issue in Gaza, both for the period that was assessed and subsequently.
Well, our US correspondent James Matthews was at the news conference.
There were one or two news lines to emerge from that press conference. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke about Rafah. You'll be aware that Israel says it has a date for when there will be an incursion into Rafah. Blinken was asked, do you know what that date is? His answer was no, but the talks will continue into next week about limiting civilian casualties when it happens. And he said he didn't think there would be action in Rafah until those talks had run their course. He spoke about the deal being discussed, about a ceasefire and hostage release. Didn't convey any great optimism surrounding these talks. You'll be aware that Hamas has knocked back the deal. Blinken said there's a very serious deal on the table, and it is for Hamas to accept it. As for Lord Cameron, Britain's Foreign Secretary, he spoke about export licences, arms, UK arms to Israel, and he was asked about his latest legal advice. He said that latest advice didn't bring about or wouldn't provoke any changes, so he's clearly comfortable at this stage still that the UK isn't breaching international law with sending arms to Israel. He was asked, of course, about his meeting with Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago. He was very circumspect about that. The detail we have, in fact, comes from the Trump camp. They're saying that Brexit was discussed, so were coming UK and US elections. The two men, we're told, discussed their mutual admiration for Queen Elizabeth II. What was clearly on the table was Ukraine. Donald Trump is a key opponent and influencer in terms of opposition amongst Republicans to American aid for Ukraine. That was discussed between the two men. Lord Cameron didn't say what the detail on that was, but one thing he did say was that he had meetings on Capitol Hill. One notable absentee from his agenda, of course, is the Speaker, Mike Johnson. He is the man who's trying to push through a deal on Ukraine, but he's a man who has not had time to meet Britain's Foreign Secretary on this trip, and one wonders whether Lord Cameron's previous criticism of Donald Trump and criticism of right-wing Republicans, likening them to Hitler appeasers, one wonders whether or not that has had an influence on who he meets and who he can actually influence face-to-face in Washington, D.C.